Death is pretty much one of the pillars that the comic book industry has been leaning on ever since it was created, as nothing is more guaranteed to shift a few units than a spicy death or 12. It's keeping people dead that comics seem to have an issue with, but that's not the point of today's Sermon on the Mount, as while there have been plenty of times where our heroes have come face to face with death, quite literally in some cases, you know that deep down they'll always make it through by the skin of their super tight suits. Right? Well, it might surprise you to find out that even some of the most established stars have been consumed by the black hole that is death. So let's list them, shall we? Because of course in these trying times, let's try to undermine the foundations that we have left. Right? Yeah, good one. With this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 untouchable comic heroes who shockingly died. Number 10, Spider-Man. What's truly fascinating about the ultimate version of the Marvel Universe is that it ran on this rule that death was a bit more permanent, and as such not something that you should just throw at a character willy-nilly, and especially not for a character like Spider-Man. So after 159 issues of the web-slinger kicking ass and trading quips, the day of his death finally came at the hands of the mutated Green Goblin. After breaking out of S.H.I.E.L.D. and taking the rest of Spidey's rogues gallery along with him, Osborn sets out on a murder spree to take down Peter once and for all. And with the heroes doing what they usually do in the Ultimate Universe, that is to say, being dicks and fighting each other for the billionth freaking time, Spidey had to face one of his worst enemies all alone. And as you can imagine, it did not go well for him. Though he is able to bring down Osborn once and for all, he ends up succumbing to his injuries and dying as well. It was a legitimately sad conclusion because we knew for a fact that this was indeed the end for him, made all the more clear by the introduction of Miles Morales. Number 9, Captain Marvel, the death of Captain Marvel. If a character dies from cancer in a comic book, chances are that they're not going to be coming back anytime soon. DC and especially Marvel tend to save the more realistic ways to go for characters whom they definitely have every intention of keeping dead. And thus we got the truly emotional and pretty raw exit of Captain Marvel in The Death of Captain Marvel, in which he contracts cancer from a supervillain and, unable to cure it, finally passes away. Now at the time, it's fair to say that he was pretty much a sidelined character at best, but this put all eyes on him and did so in a rather humbling way, which felt a little undone when they brought the character back later on. However, this too was explained away by this Captain Marvel actually being a Skrull in disguise, and so the original's death still stands as a truly stark moment. Number 8, Supergirl, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Those among us who only know Supergirl from the excellent CW TV show might find this hard to believe, but yes, in the original Crisis on Infinite Earths that the epic CW special was based on, Supergirl died. And this was all down to DC's higher-ups starting to question how, after Krypton was indeed blown up, that so many Kryptonians seemed to have survived, and it was kind of harshing their Superman mythos. So they made the decision that the last son of Krypton would just become the last full stop, and every other super person would be killed off. And so Supergirl bit the big one in huge fashion. In her last conflict, she battered the Anti-Monitor into a pulp before the monster got a lucky shot in, ending her life. And after this, a whole issue was dedicated to her loss. It was unexpected and shocking, as she was seen to be nigh on unstoppable up until this point. However, at least it was handled well. Number 7, Batman, Final Crisis. Now there is a lot to unpack about Final Crisis, from its often nonsensical story to its clunky dialogue, to Batman getting fried alive by Darkseid, to it treating the new gods like actual gods. Hang on, wait a minute, what the hell happened to Batman? Yeah, if there's any moment that defines this event comic, it's definitely where Batman goes off to face Darkseid and things do not go well for him, as wacky old Darkseid responds to being shot with an anti-new gods bullet by turning his toaster powers up to crispy and turning Batman into a pile of ash. Now, Batman had never really died before this moment, so it was a total shock to the system to see it happen so suddenly, especially when it looked like that he'd just won. Of course, he wasn't really dead, just blasted backwards through time, but in that moment, that was pretty shocking. Number 6, Captain America. Captain America number 25. Now, Cap really screwed up in Civil War. I mean, sure, it's not like anyone has any business judging him, since in true Mark Millar fashion, everyone was a complete ass in the original Civil War, but Captain America was one of the two main players in that story, so he walked away from it with a lot to answer for, which is probably why they decided to shoot him point blank in his solo book. While Steve is arguably the good guy when put against what Tony gets up to, he doesn't exactly walk away with clean hands, so it's easy to imagine that a fair few people, especially the government, would want to eliminate him. However, it's actually the Red Skull and a brainwashed Sharon Carter that claim the hit. This, of course, led into Captain America Fallen Son and Bucky Barnes' assumption of the Captain America mantle, but for Steve, it was truly the end. Number 5. Sue DIBNY, Identity Crisis. It wasn't so much that Sue was too powerful or too untouchable in the conventional sense that it was a shock when somebody actually killed her, it was that she was never really a major player in the goings-on of the DC universe, so no one actually felt the need to kill her when other deaths would have reliably driven up sales. But then Identity Crisis had to go and murder her, and then reveal that someone had sexually assaulted her way back when. Because apparently Identity Crisis was written by pure edgelords, it seems. The fan backlash was huge, and the sales did not reflect a community wanting to see more of this, but of a fan base that didn't want this kind of grit for the sake of grit in the first place. Number 4. TODD, Countdown to Infinite Crisis. The death of Ted Kord is a double-edged sword. That's a nice rhyme there. On the one hand, it was a striking moment that capped off an excellent story, but on the other hand, the actual death was one of the most gratuitous moments of gore in an era of DC where gratuitous moments of gore were pretty much commonplace. After spending the entirety of Countdown to Infinite Crisis chasing after evidence of a conspiracy against the superhero community, having his life torn to shreds, and of course, having none of his friends helping him or believing him, Ted comes face to face with Maxwell Lord. Now, Max has, completely out of nowhere, turned against the superhero community and has in fact been working against them this whole time. When Ted tries to stop his plans, Maxwell shoots him in the head, killing him instantly. Ted had been a part of the DC universe since Crisis on Infinite Earths, over 2 decades of kicking around the DCU and helping out where he could, so starting off the next Crisis with his death was a shock to the system, to say the least. Number 3. Jason Todd, A Death in the Family. Now, this is why you don't give the power of life and death to comic book fans. Back when Jason Todd was rebooted along with the rest of the DCU after Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of people really didn't like his newfound persona. So when A Death in the Family rolled around, DC set up a pair of hotlines to decide Jason's ultimate fate at the story's conclusion. Now, maybe it was comic book fans' typical lust for blood, maybe it was the title of the entire storyline that made them feel like this was the only way that it could go down, but for whatever reason, DC's fan base all chose to kill off the poor child. Now, something like this had never been done to a Batman sidekick before. I mean, sure, a version of Robin and the original Huntress were both killed in Crisis on Infinite Earths, but this was a young Robin still in Batman's care, and seeing him die so horribly stuck with the entire fandom for a long time to come. A long time indeed. Number 2. Wolverine, The Death of Wolverine. Now, to be fair, Wolverine has died quite a few times in the long and very complicated history of the X-Men, but this was the first time that it really seemed to stick for good. Obviously it didn't, but we'll just move on. In the storyline called The Death of Wolverine, Logan ends up losing his famed healing factor, which has kept him alive for so long and through so much. Upon hearing that the famous Wolverine can finally be killed, literally every enemy that he's ever had comes out of the woodwork to come have a go. This goes well for precisely none of them. But of course, the story isn't called The Death of Wolverine for nothing, so Wolverine is eventually run down, but not before stopping pretty much all of his enemies so that he can die with a smile, and as he does, coated in liquid adamantium which hardens around him, he finally suffocates to death. It was somber and brutal, but was done so well that by God was it brilliant. And number 1, Superman, The Death of Superman. Superheroes died before and superheroes definitely died after, but Superman was always seen as untouchable. If they were going to kill him, it would have to be the biggest of deals, and so DC took all of this into consideration and said, alright, it bloody well will be. I mean, sure, people criticised the methods by which they did so, as killing him off in a slug fight with a brand new villain right out of the blue wasn't that deep, but there's no denying that everyone bought this issue when it came out, helping to make it the highest selling comic DC had at the time, a trend that only continued as the series went on afterwards. But Superman's sales never really jumped up to the heights that it reached when DC decided to kill him off. So in essence, we have this to thank for why both major players love to use death, as a marketing tool. Brilliant. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 untouchable comic heroes who shockingly died. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. And if you want to chat to me more about comic books, film, TV, video games, wrestling, whatever else, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0. As always, I've been Jules. You have indeed been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.